I recently was asked by a friend of mine who was watching me play Diablo 4 on Discord, what is Diablo 4? In that moment, I was reminded that Diablo 4 is really difficult for unfamiliar players who are just being exposed to this amazing game for the first time. In this video, I'm going to break down Diablo 4 and help you understand some of the most important systems and mechanics in the game. But don't worry, I don't plan on spoiling any of the story or things you might not want to know before you play. I'm just going to show you what the game's all about and introduce you to Diablo 4. So, when you get into Diablo 4, you're met with this screen, the character creation screen. Here, you pick your class, and this is honestly a pretty hard choice. All 5 of the classes in Diablo 4 offer their own perks and benefits. Barbarians are super supportive, tanky, destructive warriors who use swords to viciously cleave enemies. The Sorceress, on the other hand, use their magical abilities in one of 3 schools of magic, including lightning, frost, and fire. Rogues are the edgy, fast-moving dagger and bow class that have a ton of build variety and move around the map very quickly. Druids have the unique ability to shapeshift into multiple animals, including werewolf and werebear. They can also wield the powers of lightning and earth to suppress their enemies. And finally, necromancers are undead warlock types that can summon undead minions or wield blood magic to defeat massive waves of enemies. Whatever class you ultimately decide to play is completely up to you. They all have separate pros and cons, and this is your first important choice in Diablo 4. So, after you've made the choice of what class to play, now you have to pick your world tier. The only difference between them is World Tier 1 is easy and much more beginner friendly, and World Tier 2 enemies are stronger and more difficult to kill. The choice here is yours, but if you're completely new to the Diablo franchise, I would recommend playing on World Tier 1 for your first character. After you've created your character, it's time to get into the game. The first thing you need to understand about Diablo 4 is the combat. And at the heart of the combat, we have the skills page. In Diablo 4, every class will have a basic skill, core skill, and then 4 other skills that provide crowd control, additional damage, defensives like a shield, and etc. Your basic skill is a skill that can always be used to deal damage, doesn't cost any resources, and applies various debuffs to enemies to weaken their defensives. Your core skill is your primary damage dealing skill, and this ability will define the identity of your build in Diablo. Since I main Rogue, I'll use Rogue as an example. For my current build, I'm using Puncture as my basic skill, which applies a debuff called Vulnerable to my enemies. Once I've applied Vulnerable, I then use my core skill Penetrating Shot to deal increased damage. This is a very simple, low-level example, and the builds do get pretty complex, so it's important to understand these simple concepts. Each class will also have other abilities, and you can read through them as you go and make your decisions on what abilities would best complement your basic and core skills. When you get later into the game and complete the campaign, you will have a total of 50 skill points. With those points, your goal is to create what we call skill builds. These builds make you strong enough to face content that gets more and more difficult as you level up and progress through the game. If you're truly new to Diablo 4, these skill pages can be a little difficult to navigate. Experienced players like myself and other content creators make builds on YouTube all the time, so feel free to look up a build for your class if you feel lost. But I would implore you to explore the skill pages and understand them for yourself. Then, if you're still having trouble, you can reference some videos for help. So, now that you've made a character and understand how your skills work, you're ready to start exploring what Diablo 4 has to offer. If you're truly new to Diablo, I'll help you by breaking down what you can do at the start. First, everyone has to complete the campaign to experience the endgame of Diablo 4. Campaign quests are marked in yellow on the right side of your screen. Additionally, if you ever get confused on where to go next or what quest you're doing, open the map by pressing M and then press Q to pull up your quest log. You can then left-click on a specific quest to track it. Diablo's campaign is an immersive experience that has compelling storylines and beautiful cinematics. So, to respect all the hard work the team at Blizzard has put into the game, I'm not going to talk any more about the campaign and leave it for you to explore. So, I've gone ahead and skipped to the main town to show you what activities you can participate in while you're doing the campaign. One activity available to you is side quests. Side quests grant you with additional experience and provide bonus tasks to do while you're going through the campaign. I do want to mention that you can absolutely wait to do these side quests until later in the game when you're a little bit stronger and have some more time on your hands. Another activity that you'll need to complete at some point are dungeons. Dungeons grant you with gear upgrades to make your character stronger, and completing certain dungeons reward you with something called aspects to make your character stronger. I'll explain what those are in a little bit. Next, there are small crevices all around the world called cellars. These are entirely optional content that generally provide you with gear and gold. You don't have to complete these, but feel free to explore them at your own will. Strongholds are another activity you can and should complete one time. These strongholds generally have a short mini story around them, a boss to fight, and once you free the stronghold of the evil presence, you can claim the stronghold for yourself, granting you renown. For the last activity you can do while playing the campaign, you have events. These aren't the same as other activities though, as you'll randomly notice them on your minimap as you're traveling around the world. Completing an event will reward you with meaningful experience, gear drops, and murmuring obols. And these obols can be used at a vendor called the Purveyor of Curiosities, who can grant you with various levels of gear depending on your luck. And that segues perfectly into the next section, gear. The gearing system in Diablo can be a little overwhelming for new players, but if you don't understand the system, you might find yourself struggling to fight monsters and even clear dungeons. Now, I'm going to do my best to make this all beginner friendly, but if you still have questions after seeing this video, please feel free to ask me anything in the comments below. Part of the reason I made a channel in the first place is to help out people and share my knowledge, so feel free to ask me any questions you might have. Anyways, as you progress through the campaign and gain experience to level up, you'll also be getting stronger gear from the content that you're playing. So, for example, I'm playing a new character right now, and just to show you how this works, I just beat one of the first dungeons in the game. Out of this dungeon, I got a new bow. This bow has 17 more damage per second than my previous bow. Generally through your leveling process, this is the metric you should use to gauge which gear to equip. But you'll get to a point later on, around level 35, where the gear starts getting a little more complicated. There's yellow rare gear that comes with 4 secondary properties. You see here how it says basic skill damage on this bow, there can be 4 of those stats. And to show you an example of this, I'll hop onto my main character, my high level rogue. So I have 2 rare bows here in my inventory, both around the same level of DPS, but they both have different secondary properties. You can see Cut and Brace here on the left has damage to dazed enemies, vulnerable damage, critical strike damage, and damage to injured enemies. And then the top stat is damage to distant enemies. Then the bow Cutway here has damage to distant enemies as the main property, then 4 secondary properties, which are chance to execute injured non-elites, damage to dazed enemies, dexterity, and damage to close enemies. Now these 2 bows are a really good example here because I want to talk about the fact that sometimes just because a bow has higher damage doesn't mean you would want to run it, and this is one of those cases for the build I'm running. So I would actually end up running Cut and Brace here, and I want to explain this because hopefully it helps you understand kind of what you look for when you're upgrading your gear. So even though this bow is lower, my build indexes heavily into crit strike damage and vulnerable damage. So the fact that I have that on this weapon plus the distant enemies, which is nice for my bow build, this bow complements my build really well. The only thing on the second bow here that's even remotely beneficial for my class is the dexterity. So I would actually end up running this bow. Now, the endgame gear in Diablo 4 gets pretty crazy, but understanding details like this will help you to ensure your character is as strong as possible. The last thing I need to talk about when it comes to gear is actually the aspect system. So you remember earlier when I was talking to you about the fact that when you complete certain dungeons, you're going to get aspects? Well, this is where they come into play. So if you go to the Oculist here, you can see if I put my bow in here, I have 2 options of how I can put an aspect on my bow. These aspects give us great legendary powers. A good example of one for my rogue really quickly is, where is Trick Shot? Trick Shot. So for the build I'm running right now, Penetrating Shot is my main source of damage, and this aspect makes Penetrating Shot so much better. It says whenever Penetrating Shot damages an enemy, 2 additional arrows split off each other to the side, and these arrows deal 10% of my initial Penetrating Shot's base damage and don't split. So you can see here with the aspect system, whenever you put an aspect on one of your weapons, you're imbuing your gear with a special power that's going to increase your overall power level on your character immensely. But basically when it comes to the aspects, the way that it works is I have my main bow here, I choose which aspect I want to put on my gear. This is where build guides can be really helpful because a lot of people have theory crafted and looked into the data to make sure they find the most powerful aspects for certain builds. But then when you know what aspect you want to put on, you simply put the weapon in, pick the aspect, and then boom. All you have to do is pay these materials, which I'm not going to do because it actually costs quite a bit at the level I'm at, but hopefully you get the idea. So all of those activities I described to you will more than keep you busy for your entire campaign playthrough. But I commonly say to friends who haven't played the game, completing the campaign is only the start of your journey in Diablo 4. However, I'll be saving that information for a video later on. I don't want to overwhelm anyone who's considering playing the game or experiencing the game for the first time. Also, you should really take your time enjoying every part of the game during your campaign playthrough. Your first playthrough of Diablo 4 on a character is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and honestly, it's a magical one. Anyways, hopefully this beginner-oriented Diablo guide has helped you make your decision around playing Diablo or assisted you in figuring out what to do as a new player. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. But my name's Invalued, and I'll see you in the next one.